You know that feeling when you're trying to fix one small thing and you end up making a mess you didn't see coming? Maybe you mixed two cleaning products under the sink and the fumes hit you before your brain caught up. Your body reacts before you understand why. That flinch is older than you think, and a version of it once changed the course of history. 9th century China, a group of Taoist alchemists are hunched over a small stove, grinding minerals by candlelight, chasing an elixir of immortality. Sulfur, saltpeter, honey, charcoal. Mix them right, the thinking goes, and aging stops. Emperors are funding this, so the alchemists keep experimenting, batch after batch. One batch didn't make anyone immortal. It caught fire, flames leaping up, singeing hands, burning down part of the building. Most versions of this story stop there. Happy accident, big flash, humanity gets gunpowder. Convenient. Too convenient. Because the alchemists who made this weren't celebrating. A 9th century Taoist text spells it out plainly. Stop combining these ingredients. People have been burned, buildings have burned down. It wasn't a triumphant discovery, it was a hazard report. Which raises a stranger question than who invented gunpowder. If the people who made it were terrified of it, how did China's accidental fire end up in the hands of every army on Earth? So why does an immortality experiment gone wrong matter to you a few thousand years later and one very different life? Because that stovetop accident cracked open a bigger idea, that matter could be rearranged to release stored energy on command. Before that moment, fire was tended. After it, fire could be triggered. The formula is almost embarrassingly simple. Roughly 75 parts saltpeter, 15 parts charcoal, 10 parts sulfur. Get that ratio close, and you've built a small explosive mixture that waits quietly for a spark. No moving parts, just proportion. And here's the part that lands closer to home. Your own body constantly stores and releases chemical energy in controlled reactions. A nerve fires, a signal releases, and stored energy does its work in an instant. The alchemists just figured out how to build a version of that same trick outside a body, in a jar, on purpose. It took a while for anyone to grasp what they'd built. For roughly 2 centuries after that first fire, gunpowder mostly stayed in the world of folk medicine and festival fireworks. Loud, colorful, mostly harmless. But the leap from household accident to battlefield weapon wasn't instant. It took people slowly noticing that something built to burn could also be built to launch. A thing designed to cheat death slowly became one of the most efficient tools ever made for causing it. And the wrong turn that got us here starts with an assumption almost everyone still makes about how weapons get invented. Most people assume gunpowder was invented on purpose by someone hunting for a way to kill more efficiently. It's a tidy story. It's also backwards. The common belief gets one thing right, though. Gunpowder really was destined for the battlefield eventually. Humans are remarkably good at finding the violent use for almost anything. That part isn't wrong. It's just not where the story starts. Here's what actually makes gunpowder work. Ordinary fire needs oxygen from the surrounding air. That's why blowing on embers helps them catch. Saltpeter breaks that rule. It carries its own oxygen locked inside its chemical structure, so the mixture doesn't need to borrow air from the room to burn. It brings its own. That's why it doesn't just burn slowly, it burns extremely rapidly, creating expanding gases with nowhere for the reaction to slow down. Humans are wired to notice exactly that kind of event. Fire has shaped human survival for hundreds of thousands of years. Warmth, protection, cooked food that unlocked more calories for bigger brains. Ancestors who could read fire's behavior tended to survive longer than the ones who couldn't. That instinct didn't disappear. It just found a far more volatile subject. So, when those alchemists watched their mixture ignite without warning, some very old part of the human brain was doing exactly what it evolved to do, locking onto a fire that behaved strangely, treating it as something worth understanding rather than simply avoiding. That same instinct is still doing its job right now. It's the reason a struck match or a stovetop flare-up grabs your attention before you've consciously decided to look. The alchemists studied their fire, they wrote down the ratios, and somewhere between that scorched workshop and the wars that came centuries later, a substance built to cheat death quietly became something else entirely. The written warning didn't stop anyone. Within a few generations, the mixture that singed hands in a workshop was being packed into bamboo tubes and thrown at enemy soldiers. But transforming a laboratory accident into a weapon took centuries. By the 10th century, Chinese military texts describe gunpowder-filled arrows launched to set enemy camps ablaze. Not explosions yet, just fire delivered faster than a torch. By the 1044, the earliest known written gunpowder formulas appear in an official Song Dynasty military manual, right alongside instructions for early grenades and fire lances, bamboo tubes strapped to spears that could shoot flames several feet before the soldiers swung the blade end. By the 1200s, the earliest surviving true guns show up, bronze, metal-barreled tubes designed to fire projectiles using that same explosive push, tied to Yuan dynasty forces. One surviving hand cannon from this era still exists in a museum collection today, a fist-sized bronze tube that once helped end an empire's monopoly on this secret. By the 1300s, gunpowder weapons had traveled the trade routes into the Middle East and then Europe. By the 1400s, cannons were knocking down castle walls that had stood for centuries, walls built to withstand catapults, never a projectile moving that fast. Here's the wild part. Every one of those leaps came from someone taking a terrifying accident and asking a different question. Not how do we avoid it, but how do we aim it? There's a modern echo worth sitting with. Every combustion engine on the road right now runs on that same core principle, a contained explosion, timed and aimed, doing controlled work instead of random damage. Your car is a fire lance that learned manners. But the part that gets skipped in almost every telling isn't the weapons at all. It's what happened to the people who kept working with this substance, long after they knew exactly how dangerous it was. Here's the part nobody expects, and it starts with a second myth hiding inside the first one. Most people assume the danger of early gunpowder work was mainly explosions, the kind of accident that scorched those original alchemists' hands. That's true, but it's not the whole picture. There was a slower danger too, breathing the stuff, batch after batch, year after year in an unventilated room. Grinding sulfur and saltpeter by hand for hours means inhaling fine mineral dust with every breath. Historians studying this period note that chronic coughing and respiratory trouble were likely common among people who worked with these minerals for years, not from one dramatic fire, but from slow accumulation. The people chasing immortality may have been shortening their own lives one batch at a time. Joseph Needham, the Cambridge historian who spent decades documenting Chinese science and eventually devoted an entire volume, the Gunpowder Epic, to tracing this exact chain, found something that still surprises historians today: how thoroughly the Western world had gotten the story backward, crediting later European armies with an invention that had already gone through 5 centuries of Chinese refinement first. That reframes the whole thing. This wasn't one accidental discovery followed by deliberate weaponization. It was the same restless human impulse, the urge to control fire, to control decay, to control death itself, branching in 2 directions at once. One branch chased eternal life, the other built the gun. Neither branch really got what it wanted. And that impulse didn't stay in 9th century China. It followed the trade routes, the wars, the same restless curiosity, all the way to you. Because the elements in that original mixture are still sitting in the ground beneath your feet, in the same rocks and minerals, waiting for someone to notice them the way a handful of monks once did. Back to that feeling under your sink. 2 products, 1 bad mix, a flinch before your brain even names the danger. That reflex is ancient, the same one that made a room full of monks jump back from a stove in 9th century China. The difference is scale, not instinct. Their accident produced a fire that fit in a bowl. Ours, refined over 11 centuries, now produces weapons that can level a city block. Same startled hands, same basic chemistry, saltpeter, charcoal, sulfur, just multiplied by every war that came after. But the similarity matters more than the difference. Every version of this story, from the alchemist's stove to a modern engine to a soldier's rifle, starts the same way. Someone controlling a reaction that wants to happen all at once and deciding exactly when to let it go. That's not really a story about weapons. It's a story about control, about a species that keeps reaching toward the thing that could kill it, because understanding the danger feels like power. The monks wanted to master death. They ended up mastering fire instead, and fire turned out to be close enough. So, next time something under your sink hisses back at you, take that half second before you flinch. Somewhere in that instinct is a lineage running back to a burned workshop, a warning nobody heeded, and a very old, very human refusal to leave a dangerous question unanswered. They were looking for eternal life. What they found was something that changed history forever.